Welcome to The Forum, your modern-day coffee house, where ideas can be birthed, exchanged, and wrestled with. We celebrate questions, conversation, and reason as powerful tools to enlighten hearts and transform minds, shaping a new generation of thinkers, innovators, and pioneers. We're glad you're here, so pull up a chair and let's begin.
Okay, this morning I want to explore the paradox of contentment. What do you need to be fulfilled and satisfied in life? Now, I have an inspiration board for this morning. That is a lot less messy than the initial one I had. But this is what we're going to explore this morning, a little bit of a map. Now, we are going to start with Scott Scheffler's deepest needs. And then we're going to move on to something else. And then you are going to get to choose where we go next. And we're going to go on a little journey exploring the paradox of contentment. Okay. Scott Scheffler has been the best golfer in the world for the past 3 years. And I recently saw this interview of him in which he has this refreshing moment of honesty in front of the world's media. And it got me thinking. So let's play it and see what it sparks.
I'm not here to inspire somebody else to be the best player in the world, because what's the point? You know, this is not a fulfilling life. It's fulfilling from the sense of accomplishment, but it's not fulfilling from a sense of like the deepest, places of your heart. There's a lot of people that make it to what they thought was going to fulfill them in life, and then you get there and all of a sudden you get to number one in the world, and then they're like, what's the point? And, I really do believe that, because what is the point? You're like, why do I want to win this tournament so bad? That's something that I wrestle with on a daily basis. It's like showing up at the Masters every year. It's like, why do I want to win this golf tournament so badly? Why do I want to win the Open Championship so badly? I don't know. Because if I win, it's going to be awesome for about 2 minutes. And then we're going to get to the next week and it's going to be like, hey, you won 2 majors this year. How important is it for you to win the FedEx Cup playoffs? And it's just like, we're back here again, So we really do. We work so hard for such little moments. And, I'm kind of a sicko. I love putting in the work. I love being able to practice. I love getting out to live out my dreams. But at the end of the day, sometimes I just don't understand the point, because I don't know if I'm making any sense or not, but am I not? It's just one of those deals. I love the challenge. I love being able to play this game for a living. It's one of the greatest joys of my life, but does it fill the deepest, wants and desires of my heart? Absolutely not.
So I thought that was interesting for the most successful golfer in the world to say it doesn't really fulfill my deepest needs. So what does fulfill the deepest needs of our life? He's the best golfer in the world, probably earned tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars doing what he does. What do we need in order to be fulfilled? What needs must be met before we can be satisfied? So let's get straight into an activity. You've got 3 minutes. We have Post-its on the table. I want you to write on those Post-its in the next 3 minutes everything you think you need in order to live a fulfilled life. One need on each Post-it. So just cover your table in Post-its of things that you think you need in order to live a fulfilled and satisfied life. Let's go. Okay, so I watched that video when I was in a hotel. And the morning after, I checked out of the hotel and went into the foyer. And in the foyer, there was a little snack section. And I'd been thinking all night, it's really interesting. I wonder, what does it really take to be fulfilled and satisfied? And the idea of needs and things like that. And interestingly, that Scott Scheffler video, I actually saw it on a YouTube reel that was a Christian YouTube channel. And it framed the story as Scott Scheffler is dissatisfied with his life because he has a God-shaped hole in him. And he doesn't have that God-shaped hole filled. Golf doesn't do it. So if only he had God or Jesus in his life, then he would be fulfilled and satisfied. Which leads us on to our next section. When I was in the hotel foyer, I saw this in the snack section, which is a Snickers bar. Let's have a little look at this Snickers bar. So, does a Snickers bar satisfy? Is that really the key to this? Well, somebody in the marketing department at Snickers wants you to think that it does. So what other influences are there around us that are trying to tell us what will satisfy us or fulfill our deepest needs? Like I said, I saw that video framed within a story around religion. Is there this God-shaped hole? Is there another kind of void that exists in all people that needs to be filled? I think there are marketing departments around the world that are setting out to tell us that there are things that we need in order to be fulfilled and satisfied. So we've written some of the things that we think we need, but the next activity for the next 4 minutes, I want to do something a little bit different. This is something I've learned from education. They call it think, pair, share. Is anyone familiar with think, pair, share? Now, the reason I want to do think, pair, share is you get together in pairs rather than a whole table. That will actually give you a little more time to talk with an individual than having to listen to the whole table. So I want you to answer this question. I want you to take a moment to think, then I want you to pair up someone around you, and then share your thoughts. How has society influenced us to think that we need things to be satisfied that we might not actually need? So consider social media, consider movies, entertainment, consider your family, your friends, consider religion. You've got 4 minutes. Think, pair, share. Let's go. All right, time's up. Let's just have one thought from each table. What is something that you think society tells us that we need that we actually might not need? Anyone want to contribute? A bigger car. Okay, so it might be a material like a car. What do we have in this table? What was the most prominent thing? Okay, so appearance. Okay, interesting. Yep. And this table? What came up? Oh, politics that works. There's a challenge. Okay, so let's go back to our original screen. We've so far looked at what we think we need and maybe what society tells us that we might need to live a fulfilled and satisfied life. Where do you want to go next? Where? The prisoner one. Okay, a prisoner's perspective. Let's jump into this. Let me find my notes. So the secret of being content. One of the most read writers in history is a guy called Paul of Tarsus. There you go. Yay! Those of us who grew up in church are like, ding! The writer of most of the New Testament of the Bible. Now, he was in prison for sharing the Christian faith when he wrote these words in a letter to a church in Greece in a town called Philippi. He wrote this: I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. Now, Paul is not the only ancient author to link contentment, being at rest with what you have, to faith in a higher power. Those familiar with King David, he wrote in a famous Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." It's an interesting phrase, isn't it? He wrote following that, "My cup overflows." There was an idea of fulfillment that actually was linked more to faith maybe than something material. And it's not just religious writers who've proposed this idea of being content. Epictetus, anyone familiar with Epictetus? So he was born as a slave, but was freed and became one of the great Stoic philosophers of ancient Rome. He wrote this, he said, "Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants." I wonder what you think about that. Contentment for Epictetus isn't about what you own, but about how little you need. If your desires are contained, from his perspective, you are already rich. He said, "Seek not that events should happen as you wish, but wish them to happen as they do happen, and your life will go smoothly." So, contentment's an interesting one. It's kind of the art of aligning your will with reality. So instead of resisting or saying like, I'm going to go after this in my life, it's saying, I'm going to stay within the container of what I have and be happy with that. Now, finally, are you familiar with the ancient Japanese practice Hara Hachi Bu? Yeah. It involves eating until you are 80% full. That's what Hara Hachi Bu means. It means belly 80% full. And it's the idea that when you eat, you don't eat until you are full and satisfied, but you choose to be satisfied with not being quite full. There are these blue zones that they call around Okinawa in Japan that they say are like the healthiest places where people live the longest. And they believe that this philosophy of Hara Hachi Bu is behind a lot of that, because people aren't eating to excess, or we often eat until we're full. They say, don't eat until you're full, eat until you're Hara Hachi Bu, and actually everything will be tickety boo. So there's something about, maybe rather in our society, we want to be full. We want to eat until we are satisfied. The idea of contentment is almost saying, I'm going to lower the bar to say I'm going to be happy with less. So, is fulfillment and satisfaction in life found in accepting what we have, lowering the bar, and choosing to be content with less? So I'm going to link this on to another card. I'm actually going to choose the next card, and we're going to have a section to discuss this. Let's jump onto the contentment quotes one. Because on your tables, you have these contentment quotes. Now, these offer a little bit of the paradox of contentment. So contentment often is saying, let's lower the bar and be happy with what we have. But H.G. Wells, the writer, said, we are kept keen on the grindstone of dissatisfaction. Thomas Edison said, restlessness is discontent, and discontent is the first necessity of progress. Do we ever get anywhere in life if we're just like, I'm just happy with what I have? Would we have ever evolved the great building practices we have if we were like, I'm just happy with the mud hut, it's okay? Would we have got the cars and the mechanics that we have if we were just happy with what we had? So is contentment the answer to fulfillment, or is contentment the enemy to fulfillment? Socrates, he was more on the contentment side. He said, he who is not contented with what he has would not be contented with what he would like to have. So, let's discuss for the next 5 minutes or so. Is the secret of fulfillment and satisfaction to be content whether your needs are met or not? Is this genuine faith? Did Paul in prison have a genuine faith, or is it really an irrational kind of burying of our needs that actually really exists? Is it folly, really? Let's have a chat around this. So, we've explored Scottie Scheffler's deepest needs. We've looked at a prisoner's perspective. We've looked at the Snickers bar and whether it satisfies in our contentment quotes. So, where do we want to go? Do we want to go to Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs or Steven Bartlett's expectations? Who's going to choose? We're going Maslow's. Okay. Hands up if you are familiar with this concept and this idea. Okay. So what fulfills our deepest needs kind of really depends on what you think your deepest needs are. We've set out some of them on the table already. So Abraham Maslow was an American psychologist who observed two types of needs that human beings have. He looked at physical and he looked at spiritual. He then split these into these 5 areas that he defined as physiological needs at the bottom of this. Things that keep you alive. Now, air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, reproduction. That's an interesting one. By reproduction, he meant more as a species, we need to reproduce if we're going to continue to exist, rather than just actually having sex, which, again, is an interesting one of where you think that fits within the hierarchy of needs. But physiological needs. So how many of your Post-it notes fit within the physiological needs? So there, what he perceived were the basic kind of ground level needs. Then he looked at safety needs, personal security, financial security, health, and property. So rather than just not dying, things that actually help you stay alive. Then he looked at the next level, which is love and belonging. So that might include friendship, intimacy, family, and connection. I wonder how many of your post-its fit within that. Now, the Beatles believed that all you need is da-da-da-ba-da. So, is that true? Is all you need is love? It's very focused, isn't it? I wonder what it is that we are often spending most of our time thinking about as far as what we think we need in life, and what layer of that beautiful cake it might be. Do you, most of your focus in life tend to be at the root, or does it tend to be higher up? He then said, the next need is the need for esteem. I wonder how many of your post-its cover things like respect, or self-esteem, status, recognition, strength, and freedom. These might be things that we consider things like ego, about perception of ourself. But he said at the peak was self-actualization, that we have a need for self-actualization, which is really fulfilling your full potential and becoming everything you are capable of becoming. Did anyone have any post-it notes that might reflect things like self-actualization? Is that something we considered that we might need? Now, somebody actually fixed this, because there is a layer beneath physiological needs, which you can show on this one, because Wi-Fi is actually the essential thing that comes at the base of everything. Which is really funny, but it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because we live in a world where I was talking to Mick the other day, we live like kings nowadays. If you think like, go back a few hundred years, we have access to so many things that people hundreds of years ago would have only dreamed about, really. And something like Wi-Fi, we didn't even really know existed like 20 or 30 years ago, but it's become something that we struggle to live without now. Now, why is it called a hierarchy of needs? So in his 1943 paper, this is when Maslow started thinking about this stuff, A Theory of Human Motivation, Maslow initially proposed that we are driven to fulfill our physiological needs, the basic needs at the bottom, first. And once they are fulfilled, we then desire to look at the next layer. So, for example, he'd say, if you, in fact, he literally said, a person who's lacking food, safety, love, and esteem would probably hunger for food before they looked for esteem. So he created a hierarchy because he was saying, actually, the things at the bottom are where you're going to start, and then once those are fulfilled, you're going to start to look up. Now, interestingly, it's always and often called his pyramid of needs, but apparently Maslow never referred to it as a pyramid and never drew a pyramid. So somebody's created this idea, which is really interesting, isn't it? Because somebody can come up with a concept and then other people shape it in a way that actually then leads people to think that it's kind of onward and upward, when actually in reality, we're often looking for many of these at the same time. And many people would argue that actually we're not always driven by root going up. In fact, I had a great conversation with Joel a while back where we were saying, actually, maybe self-actualization is more important than anything. Once we've found that idea of becoming the best we can be, actually, that creates a sense of esteem. Does that then generate love and belonging? Does it work both ways, if you know what I mean? Now, he proposed this idea of prepotency. This is Abraham Maslow. And he said the strongest impulse is towards the bottom ones, and then we kind of build up. And then when these are unmet, we're often driven by that need, like those basic needs and the physical needs first. And when they are fulfilled, we then look for the others. Okay, now there is actually, he continued to develop this philosophy and this idea, and he actually developed something above self-actualization. He said once somebody has become the best that they can, they then feel that they need something else, and he called this self-transcendence. Now, self-transcendence is about, where self-actualization is like becoming the best person you can be, self-transcendence is about valuing something more than yourself and looking beyond yourself. He observed self-transcendence in people who were willing to lose themselves in service to something greater. So whether that be helping others achieve their potential, supporting a cause, nurturing nature, or giving themselves in service to a higher power. I wonder what you think about that. Is there a level where you actually say, no, I don't care about my own needs anymore. I'm actually just, it might be with kids, you think, actually, it's not about my own needs anymore, it's about the kids. Or it might be in faith, some people say, it's not about what I want anymore, it's about what God wants. Or it might be a political ideal that people say, that becomes before anything else that's important in my life. It goes beyond me. I'm not sure whether that is that a reality for people, or is that need actually buried in things like the need for belonging or esteem? I don't know, but I wonder what you think. I wonder what your experiences are. Have you experienced self-transcendence, where you no longer care about your own needs, it actually really becomes about other people? I'm aware that a lot of us have looked at personality types, and when you have a certain personality type, for those that are familiar with the Enneagram, type 2 is called a giver, and a lot of your drive is to find your identity and esteem in what you can do for other people. It can be easy to think that that is an idea of self-transcendence, when maybe sometimes that's very much tied up in our idea of ego and esteem. But I'm open to the idea, is there a possibility that people can transcend their self, or is that a myth? I think that's something worth talking about. Now, as I've mentioned already, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is not without its critics, and many people disagree with his observations. They will point to examples of people who will prioritize things higher up the ladder before the lower down ones. So consider somebody who is on hunger strike, for example, in prison. They will say, nope, I'm going to bypass my need for food, shelter, water, for example, for an ideal, maybe a self-actualized ideal, or an idea of esteem. Some people maybe who self-harm is an interesting one. For the esteem of others or an idea of love and belonging, they might say, oh, in order to be loved, I need to look a certain way. So in order for that, I'm actually going to deny myself those basic needs. So there are lots of complications and exceptions to this. But let's have a conversation. I want you to take a look at the needs you initially wrote on the Post-its. Where do you think they sit within Maslow's hierarchy of needs? I'm going to, in fact, if I could have a beautiful assistant, somebody. Thank you, Sarah. If you can hand one of those out to each table, this is our hierarchy of needs. You can pop on the hierarchy, the Post-its. Where do they fit within that hierarchy? Now, Maslow proposed we are driven to fulfill the lower down needs before the higher needs. What are some other exceptions to this? I've shared a couple there. What do you think are some other exceptions? And what helps us when we think about self-actualization, that one at the top, becoming the best version of ourselves? What helps you fulfill that need for self-actualization? And the last one, have you observed genuine self-transcendence in others or yourself, or do you think that's actually a myth, that's not actually real? Let's have 10 minutes to chat through that. Okay, everybody, let's have a look at where we started in our ideas for this morning and what is left. We've had a look at Scott Scheffler's deepest needs and the Snickers bar and how society tells us what we need. We've looked at the idea of the secret of being content and how maybe fulfillment comes from lowering that bar and just being satisfied with what we had. But then we had our contentment quotes at the top where they disagreed with that. Maybe the idea that contentment really is a hindrance to progress. We've explored Maslow's hierarchy of needs. All that is left is Steven Bartlett's expectations. Now, Steven Bartlett was born in Botswana in Africa before moving to the UK as a child. He grew up in Plymouth in Devon in a family that often struggled to make ends meet. He occasionally resorted to stealing. Even then, he showed an unshakable entrepreneurial spirit. From dropping out of uni with nothing to his name, he went on to found multi-million-pound businesses, becoming a celebrated author, and a host of one of the world's most listened to podcasts, Diary of a CEO. He now lives a life far beyond anything the boy in Botswana could have imagined. But in this clip, he speaks about how he noticed how his growing affluence, having more of his needs met than ever, was influencing his sense of enjoyment, fulfillment, and satisfaction. So let's have a little look at this clip, and then we'll have some bits to chat about.
We're happy when our expectations of how our life is supposed to be going are met. And from that, you can deduce we're unhappy when our expectations of how our life is supposed to be going are unmet. So met expectations equals the billionaire in Mayfair getting a medium rare steak when that was what she or he ordered. Unmet expectations would be he ordered or she ordered medium rare and it came, I don't know, bloody. Like, it doesn't matter the fact that you're in a super bougie Mayfair restaurant getting a, Kobe beef A5 Wagyu steak. Unmet expectations, you get unhappiness. And you go to Botswana where I was born, hot bowl of rice, expectations met for some of the people back in the village that I was born in. The objective situation matters less than the subjective meeting of expectations. Mm-hmm. Unmet expectations in work, in your team members, in your relationship, in yourself will result in unhappiness. And that's so important to understand because then you can influence it. You can work on, as it relates to yourself, this is why gratitude is so powerful. Gratitude is, for me, it's like an adjustment of one's expectations. I didn't get on a plane and fly other than flying from Africa to the UK until I was like 21. So we didn't do holidays in our family. The money wasn't there. And I remember getting on that plane when I was 21 years old with my business partner at the time, flying to Thailand in economy, and just being captivated by this concept of being in this tin can. And we were going to attempt to fly to Thailand. And I'm looking at the safety manual and I'm like, oh, it's amazing. It's such an incredible experience. I was so happy on that flight. Fast forward 5 years. I'm flying 50 weeks a year in 2019, flying business in first class. And all I'm doing is rushing on the plane, throwing my bag up and pulling my laptop out as fast as I can before it takes off so I don't lose Wi-Fi. And then that day I encountered the lady next to me on the plane who's probably on a honeymoon or something. She's putting on the slippers and she's going, Dave, look at this catalogue. And they give you champagne and she's picking it up and she's sipping it. And she's old me. And she's experiencing the joy that I used to experience when my expectations were exceeded. And nothing has changed in my life other than my expectations have increased. Yeah. And with that, out the door has gone my joy. So what I can do now, and what I do now is when I get on the plane, just before I step in, I touch the top of the plane and I take a moment before I step on and just remind myself of the absurdity that I'm getting in this plane, we're going to fly it somewhere, and I get to sit in this comfy chair that reclines. And when they bring over the show, oh, that's so incredible. You can influence your joy if you manage your expectations. And, as it relates to relationship, the curse of the source of all unhappiness in relationship is unmet expectations.
That's the one.
You could do something about that.
So when I saw this clip, it just got me thinking again, what happens when our needs are all met? And then actually, as a little kid in Botswana, he would have been happy if his basic physiological needs, that base part of Maslow's hierarchy, was met. He'd have been fulfilled and satisfied because actually his expectations were quite basic. But as he's become more affluent, that's then influenced what he expects of life. He expects more now. If he doesn't have that perfect steak, or if he doesn't kind of get exactly what he wants, it's easy to be unhappy because his expectations are higher. And again, I guess this ties into the idea of contentment. But I think it crosses over with the idea of gratitude, that actually there's something about fulfillment and satisfaction that comes from not just a lowering your expectations, but maybe a recognition of everything that you already have within that hierarchy of needs. It was fascinating, the conversations that we were having on the table over here about how what often happens when you get higher up, you may be more fulfilled in certain ways, and you are considering this idea of self-transcendence, living for other people. it's very easy within that for other people to be collateral damage. And I think there's a lot of nodding heads in this room, because a lot of us have experienced when some people decide they're going to give all out for other people, that has a lot of collateral damage on some other people's needs maybe not being met lower down. So, I'm very aware that our time has gone. So I'm going to wrap up and then leave you with some questions from Steven Bartlett's experience. Because a phrase that comes to mind is stop and smell the roses. The idea of actually appreciating what we already have and the needs that have already been met. I think that is part, maybe there's something in there of our idea of fulfillment and satisfaction. A question to consider as well is, how are your expectations influencing your sense of satisfaction and fulfillment? Sometimes we maybe have too high expectations of what our life should be, but I would also say sometimes we have too low expectations of what our life should be, and we're unsatisfied and unfulfilled because we actually don't expect enough. We maybe don't believe we're worthy of enough. Our life can be fulfilled or unfulfilled because of different reasons there. He also said gratitude is an adjustment of expectation. So there's some stuff to chat around in a minute, but I want to just wrap up and conclude first, just so that you guys are then free to use the next half an hour as you wish. So, Steven Bartlett's advice is to embrace gratitude and appreciate what you already have. Abraham Maslow observed that there are all sorts of things that we might need, and the highest of these needs is becoming the best version of yourself. Maybe even to transcend that for the sake of a higher cause. So, our fulfillment and satisfaction actually found in having our diverse needs ticked off. St. Paul, writing from prison, King David, the Hebrew shepherd who became king, Epictetus, the Stoic slave, and the Japanese practitioners of Hachi, they propose that fulfillment and satisfaction might be connected to contentment, being at rest whether our needs are being met or not. So, is contentment the secret to satisfaction? Does faith help us find fulfillment? Now, if H.G. Wells, Socrates, and Thomas Edison were in prison with Paul, I've been watching Prison Break recently, by the way. Don't know if you remember that from back in the day. But Prison Break, they're trying to break out of prison. I wonder if Thomas Edison and H.G. Wells were in prison with Paul, they might not have agreed to stay content, but they might have said, no, we're going to find a way of getting out of here. We're going to do something about these circumstances and change what is going on, because we need something else. So has our perceived progress led us to contentment, or is contentment actually an obstacle to progress? Our satisfaction and fulfillment that we've set up as how do we find that, is it possible that they are a problem? That actually our desire for satisfaction and fulfillment actually is a problem in life that's just stopping us being happy? Or actually are they the enemy of progress? Now, have you all heard of the philosopher Anon? I actually thought Anon was a philosopher when I was growing up. Because, under quotes it says Anon, which is anonymous. I was like, wow, this guy Anon, he came up with all these amazing, stories and songs and quotes. So a quote to finish with is by the famous philosopher Anon. And they wrote, "May you have enough ambition to find a better life and enough sense to be content with it." So fulfillment and satisfaction are evidently quite complicated. There are all sorts of things to consider, but I hope they've raised some things this morning that will get you thinking about what it might mean for you and to continue this conversation. So I'll leave these questions on the screen. Thank you for listening. I hope you had a good morning.